it's said that the brain is probably the most complex organ in the body. The mind is incredibly complex, and it's what we use to navigate through our lives. Why not learn about it, befriend it, learn how to use it, learn how to master it?
Hello, my loves. Welcome back to the Lavendaire Lifestyle Podcast. It's Aileen. Today's episode is on the power of mindfulness, cultivating greater awareness and intention, and befriending yourself, your body, and your mind. With what you'll learn today, you'll be more equipped to live a more meaningful and fulfilling life aligned to your values. I personally love this conversation, and I think you'll enjoy it too. Our guest today is Dr. Willem Kuyken. Dr. Willem Kuyken is the Ritblat Professor of Mindfulness and Psychological Science at the University of Oxford, United Kingdom. His work focuses on preventing depression, promoting mental health, and flourishing across the lifespan. He has published more than 150 journal articles and was named by Web of Science as in the top 1% of the most cited scientists in the world from 2019 to 2023. His new book, Mindfulness for Life, is a practical guide to help people improve well-being, enjoy life more fully, handle life's challenges better, and live aligned with personal values. Hello, Willem. Welcome to the Lavendaire Lifestyle Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you, Aileen. And it's an absolute privilege to be here.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so you have been such a leading figure in mindfulness research and this practice for decades. Can you share a little bit about your story, what drew you to this field, and how your story has evolved over the years?
I used to work for the World Health Organization as a young man, and that took me to places like India and Thailand. And I remember having this impression that there was so much to be learned from those cultures and so much to be learned from the kind of spiritual practices, the contemplative practices, just the way people were. And I got interested and started developing a sort of mindfulness practice of my own. It helped me in my life. But in those days, I was a young scientist trying to make my career as a young scientist. It was really not in the mainstream, and it would have been a real downer for my career to have talked openly about mindfulness. So it was very much a private part of my life. I would have a daily practice. I would go on retreats. I would learn about yoga, but never would I talk about it at work until probably in the late 90s. There was a coming together of the sort of professional and the personal, and that was incredibly important to me.
Wow. So what was your career and outside facing version of yourself then, if it wasn't about mindfulness at the time?
So I was a clinical psychologist, and I was doing both practice but also research. And I was really interested in the prevention of depression and the promotion of mental health through psychological therapies. So I was doing work on developing psychological therapies, researching psychological therapies, and those were mostly evidence-based approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy. And then when mindfulness came more into the mainstream, I thought, this is a really interesting way to bring the personal and the professional together, because I had seen its transformative power in my own life. And so the idea of doing, I'm sure this is true for many of your listeners as well and your followers, is the idea of having something in your personal life or in your spiritual life that's important to you. If that can actually be part of all of your life, I think that could be a really wonderful way for people to live.
Give us your definition of mindfulness, since we're going to be talking about this in the interview. For those listening, how do you explain what mindfulness is?
Well, there's a really short answer to that, which is, we all have this capacity to be aware and to have that awareness, a bit like a sort of a floodlight imbued with kindness, with curiosity, with care. I think that's the short answer, a very present moment awareness that we can bring into our lives, into our relationships, to how we relate to our body and the world. I think the longer answer to that is, I think it's also about that awareness sort of being aligned with our values. When we become aware of what's happening in our lives, it can be a bit of a wake-up call, right? Because it may be that you're aware of, you're not in a job that you enjoy, or you are in a job that you enjoy, or your friendships are ones that add a huge amount of value, or maybe some don't. So that awareness aligned with values enables us, a bit like a compass, to kind of orient towards a life that's perhaps a bit more aligned with what's important to us, what's meaningful to us, what gives us a sense of pleasure and joy.
Yeah, when you put it that way, I can totally relate. I think in my life personally, there was a distinct period where I became more aware of my life. And previously, I called that I was just living on autopilot, right? You weren't really there or aware. Did you have a similar experience in your life and how mindfulness like changed it completely?
Absolutely. And I have to be honest, in the early days when I started practicing, the awareness made me aware of things I didn't really want to be aware of. Sometimes there'd be some kind of bit of anxiety or some dark thoughts, or, I was doing a job that was very responsible at an early age. And I thought, ooh, am I out of my depth? Sometimes autopilot is actually quite helpful. But over time, that awareness of my mind and body has become like a lifelong friendship. So when I bring awareness to what's happening in my mind, my body, my life now, it's like joining alongside a lifelong friend. My mind and body is here from the moment I'm born to the moment I breathe my last breath. I might as well befriend it, right? What was it like for you when you started to develop awareness for the first time?
It was awareness of that I was in situations that I wasn't happy with in my life. Why am I this way? Why am I doing what other people want me to do rather than what I want to do myself? It's starting to like almost like you're stepping out of your box and you're like, oh wow, I don't have to be living this way, and there must be a better way. But you're right, the lifelong friendship, it has been a journey, because I think there was a I don't know, like an aha moment in the beginning, and then the past, I don't know, 20 years of my life have been about how do I love myself? How do I like care for myself? How am I kind to myself? All those things.
You really point to something, I think, which is so important when people first meet mindfulness. I think some people can give up on it because they start becoming aware of some stuff that they don't like, right? So for you, going, my goodness, I'm maybe leading somebody else's idea of my life. And that's not the life I want to be leading. That's not a comfortable place to be, right? And then you have a choice. Do I carry on with this and do I make some changes? Or do I just shut that down and go back to autopilot? And I think you and I both have actually said, no, actually, I want to look at this stuff and I want to make the changes so that I am kind of leading that life I aspire to.
It's interesting. I didn't think we'd get to this topic, because when I think about mindfulness, I think about just the being present in the moment. I forget that it ties so much deeply into like intentional living and
Yep.
personal development, even. I think a lot of people talk about mindfulness now in the context of mental health and maybe psychology, which is why it's interesting to me that it was so unaccepted in the beginning for you back then. Tell us, how did that, I guess, melding of your personal, professional life, what did that look like? How did you begin to bring mindfulness to your work?
One of the people who's been incredibly influential in this field, who many of your listeners will be familiar with, is Jon Kabat-Zinn. And he was somebody who, trained in Zen Buddhism and various other types of Buddhism. And he was a microbiologist in a lab at MIT, really hardcore kind of scientist. And he made a decision, actually, while sitting a personal retreat, that he could either go down the route of being a microbiologist and having a life as a sort of a scientist, or he could take everything he'd learned from his Zen practice and bring that into a hospital setting in which he saw an awful lot of suffering. He's not a doctor, but he saw people with chronic pain who had all of the medical interventions they potentially could have and were still living with health conditions. And he thought, I've got something to offer here. And that's what he did. So he developed a program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, which has now been shown to be incredibly helpful with all sorts of health conditions and beyond, actually. So the first retreat I went to, sort of science retreat, was called East Meets West. And John was there. I was a scientist. I was expecting. I came with my notepad and my laptop, and the day started with yoga. And there was meditation practice after lunch. And the conversations amongst the kind of the delegates and scientists was about this kind of, it felt very different. It felt very, we are committed to whatever we're doing. In John's case, he was working in sort of healthcare settings. I was working as a clinical psychologist. But all of this idea of awareness and values and this idea of befriending our mind and body is absolutely central, certainly to the work I do. I spent 25 years of my life working on depression, and depression is, you could almost define it as people for who their mind and their body is the opposite of a good friend, because it can be such a negative and a dark place. And that movement of befriending our body and mind, I think, is a movement towards well-being. It's a movement towards healing. It's a movement towards health.
It's time to take a break for today's sponsor, Quip. We've all been there, rushing through our morning routine and trying to get through brushing our teeth as quickly as possible. But what if you could turn brushing into a mindful moment? That's exactly what the Quip 360 electric toothbrush offers. Quip 360 is scientifically proven to remove up to 11 times more plaque between teeth compared to a manual toothbrush. And if you're on the sensitive side, you'll love having just one button for 3 intensities: gentle, daily, and deep clean that get the job done your way. Just for listeners of the Lavendaire lifestyle, get 20% off site-wide and a free travel case and countertop stand at getquip.com/TLL. Free your mouth today and save 20% off site-wide, plus a free travel case and countertop stand at getquip.com/TLL. That's getquip.com/TLL. Can I ask you why you think this mindfulness is so effective, right? I think people who with experience understand, but for people who, they're relatively new to the concept, why does it work so well? Like in helping us deal with struggles, challenges, stress, just all of the above.
It's said that the brain is probably the most complex organ in the body. The mind is incredibly complex, and it's what we use to navigate through our lives. Why not learn about it, befriend it, learn how to use it, learn how to master it? There's a young footballer soccer player here in the UK, a young guy, Raheem Sterling, does a lot of really good work alongside his football. And he has a mindfulness practice, and he said, it's really simple. My mind can either be my friend or it can be my enemy. And if I make it my friend, not only do I enjoy better mental health, I also become a better soccer player. Because, if you're on the pitch and you have to take, for example, a penalty kick, the mind could easily get in the way of that, right? But if actually you've got a sense of a well-trained mind, for him, his soccer is improved. But that is true for all of us in relationship with other people, at work, decisions that we take. A well-trained mind is going to be something that helps us navigate our lives with wisdom and with compassion.
Yeah. So when you say well-trained mind, that brings me to my next question is, mindfulness is something that is a practice, right? So how do you begin training the mind? What are the practices or habits that you recommend people begin with, whether they're beginners or intermediate?
Yeah. And again, I'd love to ask you this question, Aileen, or what your own journey has been. But just before I do that, I would say that there are many blocks for people new to mindfulness where they go, oh no, this all looks a bit kind of like too much. I have to get down on a yoga mat, or I have to go on these long retreats. I think the first thing I would say is actually our life is our practice. So I'll come on to the point about mindfulness practice in a moment, but there was a young woman I was talking to the other day, and she had a mindfulness practice, and she was the mother of a young child. And she was trying to fit her mindfulness practice in with being the mother of a young child and getting to resent her practice, and also irritable with her child because every time she tried to practice, the child would wake and need her attention. And she did this extraordinary thing, which is she made this shift and she said, I am going to make my breastfeeding my practice. And from that moment on, It was something that enabled her to connect more with her infant, with her child, and actually build this sense of presence and awareness into the moments she was really connecting with her child. And it's a very bodily based practice, isn't it? Some of the practices are about body scan or mindful movement. So breastfeeding is it's a very bodily experience. So that is an example of life can be practice.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, there are many practices and a bit like medicine and drugs, every practice has got a slightly different purpose. So some are about developing focus and attention, and some are about developing qualities of mind like kindness or compassion or balance and equanimity. And other practices are about developing insight. So, I think of it as being a sort of big kind of, if you like, toolkit of practices that when we become more practiced, we go, at this point in my life, what I need is this practice. Or even for this day and in this moment, what I need is this practice. And that is the kind of journey, right? And it's a bit like if you think about our body and our mind being something that we're befriending through a lifetime, what we need at 20 is different to what we need at 40, which is different to what we need when we're a bit older. So I think there's this idea of practice unfolding over time and being bespoke to different situations. But I'd love to hear your journey. What's been your journey of practice and how you've worked with practice?
Yeah, I'd love to hear your tools as well, some examples. But I guess mine has also been a journey that I would say began with yoga, because yoga was just an exercise, which became an awareness practice. And then I got into meditating. Journaling actually has been a practice I've done almost all my life. So that's a great way for me to communicate with my mind, because I'm a very overthinking kind of person.
Yep.
And also music, like playing piano, things like that bring me into that feeling of flow and feeling of joy in my body.
Yep.
I think are big. Those are probably the big ones. And then, as you said, there's a lot of things that I've tried, and it's the practices unfold, but I would say those are the big ones for me.
So, I try to start every day with a sense of intentionality. So a sense of just connecting with my mind and body as the day starts and thinking, what's coming up today and how do I want to lean into that? How do I want to meet that day? So starting the day with a sense of intentionality. And then sometimes I'll have a practice in the morning, and that practice will just depend on where I'm at. Sometimes it's a body scan practice, sometimes it's Qigong, sometimes it's some yoga. And throughout the day, I will try to pause and connect. Just what's happening in the mind and the body as I go through the day, and just ask myself a really simple question. What do I need in this moment? Or actually, if I'm with somebody else, what does this person need? Or if I'm working on something or I'm out in the world, what does this person need, or what's needed in this moment? And then I'll try at the end of the day to have a little bit of a review, a little bit of a scan back, and just have a sense of appreciation of what's gone well through the day. Really kind of dropping into and savoring. Gosh, that, meeting with my daughter for brunch, I really, really had a lovely sense of connection, and the food was delicious. And that was a really lovely moment. Or if something difficult happened, I'll go, maybe if I just lent into that with a bit more kindness or a bit more letting go, that might have gone better. So that's what I mean by mindfulness for life. It's about really integrating it into life and actually learning from all of that. So life itself becomes practice. I do go on retreats. I try and go on a retreat a year. And it's just a chance to go a bit deeper, right? And a chance to really sort of spend a bit more time in a sort of deeper contemplation and kind of recharging the batteries at a kind of deeper level.
Another reason why I like this concept of mindfulness for life is the fact that you brought up, you don't have to create new habits or practices. It's whatever you're already doing that you just drop in and try to become more aware. Ask yourself these little prompts throughout the day, and or even at just the end of the day. I think that's really, really actionable and helpful for people listening.
Yeah. I wanted to just pick up on something you said, Aileen, which is about music, because the music's really important for a lot of people, right?
Yes.
I think music, like anything, like art, like running, like exercise, can easily, you talked about it being a flow state. And I think in mindfulness, the way I teach it and I've learned it is we talk a little bit about these two different ways of kind of knowing the world and being the world. Is one is to experience it, and the other is to reflect on it and think about it. When we listen to music really in an experiential mode, you just have this sense of the music moving through us, and you feel a sense of joy or vitality or energy or sadness, whatever the music is, or nostalgic. You just really enjoy that, right? But you can also think about the music and you go, oh, that's interesting. Some musician friends of mine say, there's a change from a major to a minor there. And that's the change in mood. And that's kind of clever. And you can shift between the two. And that kind of awareness and moving between thinking and experiencing can be so powerful. With sport, with music, with art. But I would go further. And there's something in Mindfulness for Life, which we call the 50-50 practice, where we can bring this to any part of our life. Even right now, speaking to you, I can hold 50% of my awareness in my own mind and body. And when I do that, I've got a sense of, I feel really energized, and I feel a real sense of kind of liking and appreciation. And then the other 50% is you and what you're asking and what you're saying. And if we can go through our day with a bit more of shifting between experiencing and thinking in this 50-50 practice, our life just becomes enriched, and it becomes a bit more intentional, and it becomes a bit more informed by what's happening for us in any given moment.
That's so interesting, because I've never heard that exact concept before. The fact that it's good for us to be able to step into both the feeling and the thinking, the experiencing and the thought. Why is that? Why is it not versus being completely in that experience, right? Because I love music for many reasons, but one of the reasons is it helps. You can create your energy with the kind of music you choose to hear, right? You play an exciting playlist or you play a calm playlist. I use music to kind of design my energy throughout the day. But I mean, that's just one angle. But yeah, why is it the 50-50 that makes us better and more enriched?
I think just the way we've evolved and the way we are means that kind of experiential mode is incredibly suited to certain things. It's incredibly suited to just enjoying music and being in the flow and whatever it might be. And of course, the thinking mode is what got us to the moon, and it's what got us our education, and it's what enables us to solve problems. But because we're so good at thinking and we're so good at turning things into words and talking, that can be like our default mode. That's where we go. And then you forget to go, my goodness, this is such a warm and lovely feeling. Or even this meal. I'm thinking about this meal, and this is a Michelin restaurant, or this is just everybody's talking about this restaurant. And then you forget to actually really taste the food and really enjoy the richness of the food. So I think we have this experiencing mode and thinking mode, they have different purposes. And once we start to play with them intentionally, we can know when it's useful to deploy one and when the other. So we talk about music and experiencing being such a helpful mode. But you think about something like, I don't know, making love. That's a place for the experiential mode, right? It's not a place to be overly thinking about things. And then there are other places where if you get into experiential mode, it's not going to help you. If you're sitting having to do an exam, a SAT or whatever it is, that's not a time to that's a time to get your thinking mode in mind. And where that goes wrong is, I think, for example, with relationships, when things go wrong in relationships, overthinking things can create more problems. Sometimes just dropping into the body and going, what's needed in this moment? Oh, I see. Empathy, an apology, just a touch, not thinking, okay, I've got to justify my position. I've got to get into an argument. I've got to, I feel really bad. So sometimes that kind of, we get into thinking in places that causes problems for us, like, problems in relationships. So they both have value. And I think what I'm saying is that mindfulness practice, particularly when we really bring it into our lives, we start to know when they serve us and when they don't, these two different modes of mind.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. Yeah. Once you're more aware, I don't know if the word is control, but you can kind of pick and choose which one to lean into more depending on the moment.
Exactly.
Yeah, like one of your examples, it's actually pretty common to me when I'm having a really good conversation with a friend. I forget what I'm tasting. I don't even realize what I'm tasting. I'm like, oh, I just had the whole meal, but I was so focused on the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
And so, what is mindfulness? Like, is that still mindfulness because you're dropped into the conversation versus the food? Because some people say, oh, mindfulness is about your five senses.
But it's about both of those, isn't it? Because I thought you were going to
Okay.
say something else. I thought you were going to say, I'm
Okay. What were
really
you thinking
enjoying an
I was gonna
interaction
say?
with a friend. And what does that mean to really enjoy it, right? Because sometimes when people are talking, they're not really listening. They're just thinking about what's the next story I'm going to tell, or what do I
Oh,
think about
yes.
what this person said. So when you say I'm really enjoying some time with a friend, what does that mean? Enjoying time with a friend?
It also means you're experiencing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when I was traveling in some of the Arabic countries, I just found it really interesting that women and men would walk hand in hand and arm in arm with each other, friends or siblings. And I just thought it's that sense of touch, that's like, this is my friend, so we're going to walk hand in hand. And we don't do that in the States or in the UK. And I just thought that kind of sense of physical touch in a friendship, in a relationship, people seem to really enjoy that. I thought it's just a different way of doing things.
Time for another short break. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. When we think about relationships, we often focus on the things we should avoid, red flags. But what about the green flags? Those positive signs that show a relationship is supportive, uplifting, and aligned with your values. Therapy can help you identify these green flags and nurture healthier, more fulfilling connections, whether you're building new ones or enhancing existing ones. With BetterHelp, therapy is just a click away, right from the comfort of your home. With a network of over 30,000 credentialed therapists, you'll find the right fit for your needs, and you can even switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. BetterHelp makes therapy affordable and convenient, with over 5 million people served worldwide. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/TLL to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/TLL. I have some questions for more practical applications of mindfulness because I'm sure you have a lot of good info in your book that can help. So, something like distractions. How can listeners start to regain focus? Because we're so easily distracted these days.
One of the things I think people find helpful is the idea of an attention budget. So let's say you start the day, you wake up with $100 in your attention budget. And that's going to get depleted as the day goes on, right? Inevitably through all of the challenges and the pulls on our attention. And again, I think there's this idea about, the first thing I'd say is there's this thing about intentionality. Can you go into the day with a sense of, where do I want to spend my budget? Or am I just going to let any old person take this money away from me, take my attention away from me? And there is a reality to that, right? If you just go, the obvious example is to go on a phone and just, you go, my gosh, an hour later, 2 hours later, you've just been following links. And it's very seductive. But that can be true with all sorts of things. You can be rehearsing a resentment in your head, or somebody can cut you up on the highway. And the next hour, you're spending dollars of your attention budget about that person who cut you up, who didn't even notice you. You've given that all away. So I think the first thing is the sort of intentionality. And that's what I meant by kind of setting up the day and leaning into the day. And being, I guess, deliberate about how we spend our attention, how we use our attention. And I think the second is, there are meditation practices that we know can help us develop attentional capacity, if you like, so that you can get better at focus. So there are kind of attention focused practices that can help with really keeping our attention. And I think the third thing I'd say is just for people to be really kind to themselves about this, because it's so easy to make this into a fight or a battle. And we all get distracted. We all get pulls on our attention. And just being kind and going, oh, what happened there? What was that about? And, I am a bit prone to, it'll be different for everybody, for just checking the messages from my friends or going on my favorite news channel or whatever it might be. And just being kind with yourself and just each time firmly, kindly coming back to what it is you're focused on. That being said, you talked earlier about flow. Sometimes it's really nice, actually, just to have periods of reverie and periods where you just let your mind go wherever it wants to go. So it doesn't become like a boot camp or something where we kind of punish ourselves for not being totally focused like a sort of ninja.
Yeah, I don't think it's about forcing yourself to be focused. I think it's about what you mentioned, being intentional and aware of, why am I getting distracted, right? Am I running away from something? Am I avoiding something? Or I think it all, like with everything, more awareness can help us make better decisions.
I sense this is something that comes naturally for you, but I always love Simone Weil's idea that our attention is something that we can be incredibly generous with. So she has this thing she talks about of, one of the most generous things you can do is to give somebody your undivided attention. And I think that's so true, right? So if a friend or a child feels that they have our undivided attention, it's such a precious gift. And I would extend that to ourselves. Giving ourselves our undivided attention is it. So you move towards this idea of this is a gift, right? Our attention is a gift. It's valuable. Cherish it. Look after it. Take care of it. Use it wisely.
Yes, definitely. Okay, the next question is about dealing with stress or like overwhelm, things like that. How can mindfulness help in those situations?
It's really interesting. Overwhelm is just something that a lot of people describe, right? And when we feel overwhelmed, our sense of capacity and our sense of being able to cope just shrinks. So I think what can really help in those moments is a practice which is called anchoring. And the anchoring is a bit like the 50-50 practice, but we have somebody somewhere in our body or somewhere outside of our body we can just come back to, like the soles of the feet or the sitting bone, and just changing the posture and coming back into anchoring and really just resting in the breath or the body or whatever it might be. And that's a way just in the moment of just noticing overwhelm and anchoring. I guess what I'd say as well is one of the things that I think comes from a sustained mindfulness practice is a growing sense of capacity. It's certainly been my journey over years, is the more I practice and the more I bring it into my life and learn, the more I actually feel I have a sense of capacity and I'm less likely to be overwhelmed. And then you feel a bit more confident, right? So it's kind of becomes like a virtuous circle. I do think, back to what we were saying a little while ago about awareness, the more aware we are, the more we can realize that actually we need to do some things to look after ourselves, to nourish ourselves. It's like when you look at a battery in the top right corner, there's a little icon which tells us what the charge is on the battery, right? And if it's 80%, all is good. If it's down to 20%, you're going, gosh, okay, it's a bit run down. Then it goes to critical and then it switches off. And I think through mindfulness, we become really good at being able to do that with ourselves. Okay, I'm good. I've got a sense of energy and vitality. This is a day that I can really lean into. Gosh, today, actually, I'm running at 20, 30%. I've got to take it easy. I've got to do some things that really nourish myself today and maybe just take a few charges through the day if I can.
Oh, totally.
And a lot of people aren't doing that, right? They're just rushing through their day, sometimes for really good reasons. They've got young kids, whatever it might be. But I think that we would never treat our phone that way. We'd never treat our phone or our car that way. And I think part of my work is about trying to shift the narrative so that we start treating people, we ourselves, but also the people who are responsible to us, maybe our family, our friends. But if we employ other people, we look after them in the same way.
Yeah. Well, I love that because I kind of had a mini aha moment that if you lived mindfully and you were aware, then you wouldn't get to the point of stress or overwhelm because you have more check-ins with yourself, right? You're aware, oh, my battery's at 20%. Oh, it's at 10% now. Instead of waiting until it's 0 or negative and everything's
Exactly right.
So it's almost like that is the solution itself, right? Just to have more awareness, have more care, So it's both the awareness, and it's also mindfulness is also a way to recharge, right? Like the
Yeah,
anchoring to me seems like a way to recharge, and
absolutely.
meditation, all of those. There's so many practices that feel good, right? They help us recharge that energy and that build the capacity. So yeah, that was really great.
I guess what I'd add to that, I think, which I think you pointed to, is that this idea of kind of checking in and doing things differently if we need to, depending on our state of battery, if you like. That can be like a micro practice. It can be in this moment. Okay, in this moment, I'm at 20%. What do I need right now? But it can also be a practice at the level of a day or a week or a month
Yeah.
or a year.
Oh yeah.
Or, okay, I'm about to become a parent. This next phase of my life is going to look a bit different. Or my children are about to leave home. This next phase of my life is about to look different. So it can be done in the tiniest moments, but it can also be done in the bigger moments. I'm retiring.
Yeah.
What do I need as I move through this transition in my life?
Yeah.
And I think when we do that, you're exactly right. You don't get to the point of going, oh my gosh, I'm at critical levels, or I don't know what I'm doing, or whatever.
Yeah. I actually think that's one of the biggest shifts in my life too, is to reflect more. Like I said, I'm big on journaling, even goal setting, planning for the new year. I try to make it I actually journal a little bit each day, right? I write
Mm-hmm.
down my highlights, what I've learned, whatever things that I want to remember, but I try to make it a habit to do like a monthly review or monthly reflection. And so I think the more you're aware and reflecting, the more you can steer it. And it doesn't
Yep.
have to be every moment or every day, but it's like you said, it could be a month, it could be a year, but it's important to do this though. Like
Yeah.
if you don't do this, that's when you miss a lot of things in life and you don't realize your state.
Do you mind me asking, was there a period where you did one of those, say, monthly reviews and you had to recalibrate something? Was there an example of that?
Oh my gosh, always. I
Yeah.
always have to, even not out of my monthly reviews, right? When I'm not feeling well, I journal. I'm like, okay, what's wrong? What do I need to change? I did that last night. I'm feeling a little bit tired. What do I need to change? What can I take off my plate next year?
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
always doing this, always recalibrating. And yeah, because you have to listen to your energy kind of, you can't go living in a way that's unsustainable. So I'm
Yep.
all about, yeah, how do I move forward in a sustainable way that feels good, where I'm still, proud of myself doing what I want to do. But it's a balance of everything.
I love that idea of kind of listening to your energy and recalibrating your energy. And I
Yes.
also love that word sustainable, right? How can we
Yes.
be in the world in a way that feels sustainable? And that's kind of both in a real sense, but also that I love kind of the way that also invokes the idea of the natural world. Because if you look at forests and you look at
Oh,
ecosystems,
yes.
they've got built-in ways of sustaining themselves.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Nature grows and flourishes, and yet it takes a break. And
Yep.
yeah, nature is like the biggest inspiration for us.
I say that sometimes to people because my work has historically been with depression and I've suffered from depression myself is, wintering is a really interesting idea, right? So, in
Yeah.
countries where they have really four distinct seasons, winter is a period where everything kind of hunkers down. And then just beneath the surface, it's all about to come into action again when spring comes around. It's just a
Yeah.
natural part of the four seasons. And I think we as human beings have the same thing, right?
Totally. And it also helps me with the concept of some things don't have to be seen. A lot of work is done underground and invisible to the outside world. That's huge because I think I don't know if it's society or something taught us, oh, we always have to be good, look good on the outside, or look like we're doing well, something, right? There's this always on type of expectation, but life is phases of you have flourishings and then you have the hibernations and you have
Yeah.
a lot of the work is unseen.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, even if we are more aware, we're only aware of a fraction of what's happening in our body at any moment. There's an awful lot of stuff happening that we're not even aware of that's picking up cues from, you talked about the five senses, but there's also balance. There's also the breathing. The body is incredibly complex and doing all of these amazing things in the background. And it just gives me a real sense of appreciation, I think, of the richness of the natural world and of the human ecology and also of our bodies and our minds.
Before we go on, let's take a break to hear about today's sponsor, 23andMe. I've always believed that taking care of your health starts with truly understanding it. That's why I'm so excited about 23andMe Plus Total Health, a longevity platform designed to help you take a proactive approach to your well-being. With advanced genetic testing and biomarker analysis, it gives you valuable insights into your health risks so you can make informed choices to support your long-term wellness. One feature that really stands out to me is biological age, which tells you how old you really are from the inside based on biomarkers that reflect the condition of major body systems and organs. Unlike your calendar age, your biological age could slow down or even reverse if you make lifestyle changes, enhancing your longevity. Advocate for your health today. Go to 23andme.com/TLL for 10% off. That's 23andme.com/TLL. Something else I wanted to bring up with you is the concept of resilience, right? One of your core messages in your book is mindfulness can help us navigate life's challenges and be more resilient. So can you share an example of why that works and how people listening can become more resilient through mindfulness?
And I think of resilience as kind of our resources matching the challenges on us, right? So I remember a period in my life when I had just been to see my daughter in Florida. So I'd flown from Oxford to Florida, and then I'd had to go and teach in Japan. And then I was speaking at a festival. And I remember arriving at the festival, and I had not practiced what I'd just been preaching in the last 10 minutes. I was exhausted, right? I'd gone all the way to this time zone, then all the way to this time zone. I got to this festival, and it was a big tent, and I was supposed to go in there, and there were 500 people I was supposed to speak to. And I just went into the woods, and I started to cry. And I phoned up a friend. I said, I don't think I can do this. And she talked me through it. And so that is an example of everything I've just been talking about, I hadn't done. And my resources were not up to the task. And so it is about resourcing ourselves, resilience, I think, to be able to meet the challenges in our lives. But I do have a bit of a mixed relationship with the word resilience, because I think it is actually quite helpful to think about resilience being not just about us as individuals, but I think it's really helpful to think about resilient friendships and resilient families and resilient workplaces and schools, because, we've just done an 8-year study with children and schools and learning mindfulness. And we found that actually one of the most important things that supports the mental health of children is the culture of the school. So can a school be resilient? Can a school be a place that actually can be adaptable and provide the resources to support the teachers and to support the kids? And I think the same is true in workplaces. I've just come back from Denmark and Copenhagen, where workplaces spend a huge amount of energy on looking after their staff around maternity leave and paternity leave. And at lunchtime, everybody stops and sits around a table. And the employers that I visited provided a really healthy buffet lunch. So that organization is providing a resilience for the employees so that they feel they can go and pick up their kids and they can go to dentist appointments. And then they feel more resilient at work rather than feeling frazzled. So I think that idea of resilience is about us resourcing ourselves so we can meet the challenges of our world. But it's, I think, also really helpful to expand it out, to think about wider kind of circles of resilience, if you like. I don't know, is that the way you think about it?
Well, I like that you brought that up, because when I think of resilience, I'm thinking about inner resilience and how you can pick yourself back up sort of thing. But you're right. It's our environment influences and shapes us so much. It's such an important part that if you are part of a community or organization, how can you create a culture that is resilient? How can you support the people around you? I think it is everything.
Yeah.
I guess it all starts with the intention of choosing to be resilient, choosing to foster a positive environment.
I think you were speaking earlier about, for you, part of your early awareness was this sense of what other people expected of you, and also things around appearance. And I think partly why I told the story about the festival is that I think, resilience also means owning our vulnerability. Because we're not, we're not invulnerable. We are vulnerable. Yeah. And I think to own your vulnerability and to admit when you need help is also part of resilience, right? Because it's a kind of, as you said, it's a constant recalibration, a constant learning and checking in with your energy. And for me, that was a sort of wake-up call. After that, I decided to only do one big international trip a year. And that was just, because actually it takes quite a lot out of you, or me anyway, to be jet setting all over from one side of the world to the other in relatively short periods of time.
Yeah, I love that. Owning your vulnerability, owning your failures. It's not about not failing or not being flawed. It's just accepting that's a part of life, that's a part of me, and then just moving forward.
Yep.
You mentioned depression. You've had experience with it. I think we have a global mental health crisis where depression literally is so common, and a lot of people struggle with it. So what can you say about how mindfulness and your expertise can help people? Like, what is something you wish everyone knew? What can you give to help the situation?
So I think the first thing to say, thank you for bringing this up, is to do a bit of normalizing, right? We've just gone over about 8 billion people in the world. And so about 1 billion people in the world alive today at some point will have some significant mental health challenge. And the other 7 billion will know somebody or love somebody or work with somebody who has that challenge. So this is something that is of concern for all of us, I think. And mental health is something of concern for all of us. I think, I sometimes will, in a workshop, just ask people to raise their hands if they've suffered from depression themselves or know someone well who has. And normally close to 100% of hands will go up. I mean, the second thing is to think about mental health as kind of a spectrum. It's not, we were talking about this earlier, right? So you can have real mental health problems, or you can just be languishing. You can be doing fine now, but not in the future. Or you can be doing fine in one area of, you can be doing amazingly in your career, but in your personal life feel like you're really languishing and floundering. So the first thing is just to normalize it. I think the second thing is that we do know how to work with depression. We have antidepressants, we have psychological therapies, we know things like exercise and relationships help with depression. But you asked specifically about mindfulness, and I've spent 25 years working on a therapy called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is a very particular approach where people with a history of depression learn skills to recognize the early warning signs of depression coming back for them and to respond differently. And we've shown in more than 10 randomized controlled trials that this is not only effective, but it's an alternative to antidepressant medication, and that we've seen it being rolled out in countries around the world. Here in the United Kingdom, you can go to your primary care physician or self-refer and get access to mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And I think that's amazing. What does it do? So there was a young woman in one of my classes who said she was with her young kid, toddler, and she was pushing the toddler on a swing. And she thought, and the toddler was just delighted and chortling and laughing. And she described this moment where she thought, this is a beautiful moment. And then she had the thought, this isn't going to last. And that very quickly cascaded into, and I'm not a good mother, and I'm going to mess up my kid, which is the early warning signs of depression. And she described it in the class to everybody around the room as being like a wrecking ball thought. And with depression, people can really identify with their thoughts being so powerful and like wrecking balls that they can very quickly take people on a downward spiral. And the beauty of that metaphor, of course, is that if you just take one step back, the ball goes whoosh past you in front of you. And over time, it loses its power. And that's what's happening when people use mindfulness with depression. They start to see what's happening in their mind and body and stand back from it a little bit, maybe just even be a bit kind with it. Winston Churchill described his depression as being like his black dog. And, people like their dogs and they have good relationships with their dogs. So he would say to his wife, my black dog is visiting. And that, I think, is a really powerful metaphor, because he's saying he's got a different relationship to the depression. He sees it as his black dog, and he can stand back from it and relate to it differently, and maybe even over time befriend it, which I think is a really strange idea for people, this idea of befriending difficult parts of our mind. And it is difficult. But when you do it, it's beautiful, beautiful work. Some of the best musicians, the best poets, the best writers have in some way or another befriended their depression, their demons, whatever you want to call it.
I think that's really helpful. And I've heard this concept before of just like not identifying with the pain or the depression. It's not who you are, and it's not complete. Like, I think so often you think your thoughts are you and you're completely in them, but it's, kind of putting it outside of yourself, looking at it and being aware that it's a part of me, but it's not all of me. And it's like the black dog metaphor helps.
100%.
Do that. Can you give us a little bit more examples of some tools in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy that anyone can use and help in their lives?
So I think the first thing is this kind of awareness of our thoughts. And that's not easy, right? So we actually start with awareness of the body, and then we move to awareness of sounds, and then to awareness of thoughts. So we can just steady the awareness and bring it to the body, and then go, oh, okay, what kind of thoughts are happening? And for most of us, our thoughts are just like, it's like, they're kind of like, leaves floating down a river in front of us. But for folks with depression, occasionally there'll be like a little flurry of leaves that are kind of negative and have got the potential to drag them downwards. So if they can stay, again, anchored and grounded in those moments and develop that different relationship. But then the other thing that you and I have said a number of times in our conversation is that these are moments to ask the question, what does this moment need? If I'm not going to engage with these thoughts, what else might I do? And I think recovery from depression in many ways is actually not rocket science. It's about doing things that give us a sense of pleasure and a sense of mastery. And by that, I mean, okay, I could sit, I could do what many people with depression describe as like a duvet dive. It's like when you just disappear under your duvet and ruminate. Or I could take the dog for a walk. Or I could phone a friend, or I could just do something that actually I know will make me go for a run, make me feel better. And people with depression, but actually probably all of us, get the relationship between motivation and how we feel the wrong way around. That actually, if we go out for a walk or we journal, we'll often feel a bit more motivated rather than waiting to feel motivated to do those things. And I think,
yes, completely.
Yeah. And I don't know, I first was depressed probably in my early teens. And I just have a very different relationship with it now. I have a faith that I will be okay. And I'm not going to say it's a good thing or it's in any sense an enjoyable experience, but it's part of who I am. And it's part of what.
Oh, yeah.
And, I've come to befriend it, I think.
I also experienced depression when I was like in college and also a little bit after college. And that was before my aha wake up moment sort of thing that I talked to you about. But in your journey, do you feel that after you found mindfulness, like did your mindset and did your depression change completely? Like, did it ever come back, and how did you deal with it? Or did you feel like there was light at the end of the tunnel where you could live a life without depression?
I think my journey has been, I've felt like I've been able to live my life more and more and more the older I've got. But that doesn't mean that I've not had moments of depression coming back. But they've not been so scary, and they've not been so overwhelming, and they've not taken me, I've not felt out of control in a way with them. I don't call it my black dog. I call it my swamp. And there's this amazing kind of Vietnamese monk who passed away recently, Thich Nhat Hanh, who many of your followers will know. And he talked about, there's no lotus without mud. And so
I
I
love that.
call, yeah, it's a beautiful metaphor, isn't it? And I call my depression my swamp. And, when I visited places like rainforests, the swamp is part of a whole rainforest. It's a bit smelly and it's a bit gurgly and you wouldn't want to go in there. But there are trees coming out of there, right? And it's producing,
Yeah.
the swamp is part of an extraordinary ecosystem. And when I relate to it like that, I feel very differently about it.
Yeah, I love that. I also like to see my life that way, to embrace everything, right? The not so beautiful part, like the ugly dark parts as well as the light, because without experiencing that and going through that, I wouldn't have appreciation for
Yes.
the other side of the spectrum, and I wouldn't have as much empathy or compassion. Right? If you only live life on one tone, you can't relate. You wouldn't even know, you don't have that perspective.
It's like you were saying just now about the lotus. It is a beautiful flower, right? But if you know that about where it really flourishes, it becomes actually, I think, even more beautiful.
Yes. I agree. Okay, so looking ahead, are there any research or projects that you're most excited about in this field of mindfulness and mental health?
Yeah, so I guess I've spent most of my career first with individual evidence-based psychological therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, and then group-based interventions. And I'm more and more thinking that if we are going to make real inroads to mental health, we need to be thinking with a slightly broader vision to the kind of context in which children grow up, families
Mm,
and schools, and then the context in which
yep.
adults are, workplaces and communities. Not to say that sort of individual resilience isn't important and individual therapy isn't important, but if we're going to really enhance human mental health and help people to flourish, I think we need to look in a broader and a more ambitious way. And the metaphor I think can be helpful is if you think about the last 50 years and what's happened with heart health. 50 years ago, nobody knew about the relationship between smoking and heart health, or exercise and heart health, or fatty meat and heart health. And now most people know that, right? They know that smoking is not going to be good for our hearts and our lungs. And that if we exercise and eat well, it will take care of our hearts. And I think I'd like to see in the rest of my career working on mental health in the same way. What are the kind of no-brainers that need to be part of the fabric of an individual, of a family, of a school, of a workplace, that are the equivalent
Yeah.
of diet and exercise for heart health? And I think it's not rocket science, and I think it's very achievable.
Yeah, I think it's achievable too. And I think it is important for our vision to extend beyond the individual. Like, we need to change our schools, our communities, workplaces to understand what helps humans flourish. So, yeah, I love that.
Well, I was just going to say that's also what you're doing with your work. Is what you're trying to do is to bring these ideas into the mainstream, right? They're not the province of hospitals and mental health clinics. They're part of the mainstream, and I think that's a deep bow of respect and appreciation to you for the work that you do.
Oh, thank you. And it is true. Yes, yes, we're talking to individuals, but individuals are the ones who are also in power. Like, you can influence your family or your workplace or your school. So this is how we do it. Okay, so if you were to leave our listeners with one final piece of insight or advice, what would that be?
What I'm suggesting with this idea of mindfulness for life is that, in a way, I'm suggesting to your listeners that they don't have to do anything different. They just carry on leading their life, and they have to do everything differently. They have to think about how they relate to their life with awareness, with intentionality, with a sense of really befriending their minds and bodies. So I think that would be my closing thought.
Amazing. All right, Willem, where can we find you online?
So if you put mindfulness for life .co.uk, my website has got all of the links to the book and our resources and all of our science papers on there as well.
Okay. Everyone will have all the links down below. Thank you so much, Willem, for today's conversation. I it really brought some new insights for me, at least in mindfulness. And also your energy is very calm. I can hear you take a breath before you answer because you're actually being aware. Like you're taking a pause, which not everyone does.
Yeah.
But I noticed that. So thank you for living it. And thank you for the work that you do.
And back at you as well. Thank you to you.